On August 25, 2025, the United States once again found itself divided over one of the most emotionally charged symbols in its history, the American flag. President Donald Trump signed an executive order that directed federal prosecutors to pursue criminal charges against those who burned or desecrated the flag. While supporters praised the move as a long overdue act of patriotism, critics quickly warned that it represented a direct assault on the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. This was not the first time America had fought over this issue. The question of whether burning the flag is an act of free expression or an intolerable insult has haunted the country for decades. Supreme Court rulings, congressional debates, failed amendments, and countless protests have circled around the issue. Yet by reviving this fight in 2025, Trump ensured that the nation would once again confront a difficult dilemma. How far should free speech go? And can even the burning of America's most sacred national symbol be protected under law? What follows is the story of how this executive order came to be, the history behind the fight, the legal challenges that lie ahead, and what it means for the future of free speech in the United States. Trump's executive order was simple on its face, but sweeping in its impact. It instructed federal prosecutors to treat flag desecration not as mere protest, but as a criminal act worthy of punishment. The order suggested that individuals convicted of burning or destroying the flag could face fines and up to a year in jail. In signing the order, Trump declared that the American flag was not just fabric, but a sacred national emblem, a living representation of the sacrifices made by soldiers, veterans, and patriots throughout U.S. history. To desecrate it, he argued, was to desecrate the nation itself. Attorney General Pam Bondi, newly appointed in Trump's second term, echoed his words, promising that the Department of Justice would aggressively enforce the new directive. "No one," she said, "has the right to trample on the very symbol of the freedom they enjoy." But to legal scholars, the order immediately raised red flags. The U.S. Supreme Court had already ruled, more than 3 decades earlier, that burning the flag is a form of symbolic speech, protected under the First Amendment. Trump's order, in their eyes, was not just controversial, it was unconstitutional. To understand the controversy, one must go back to 1984, during the Republican National Convention in Dallas. Outside the convention hall, a protester named Gregory Lee Johnson set fire to an American flag in protest of President Ronald Reagan's policies. Johnson was arrested and convicted under a Texas law that prohibited desecration of the flag. His punishment included jail time and a fine. But Johnson appealed his case all the way to the Supreme Court, arguing that his act of burning the flag was not a crime, it was a political statement. In 1989, the court issued a narrow but groundbreaking decision in Texas v. Johnson. By a 5-4 vote, the justices agreed that flag burning is a form of symbolic speech. Justice William Brennan, writing for the majority, declared that the government could not prohibit an expression simply because society found it offensive. "If there is a bedrock principle underlying the First Amendment," he wrote, "it is that the government may not prohibit the expression of an idea simply because society finds the idea itself offensive or disagreeable." This ruling infuriated many Americans, including politicians on both sides of the aisle. For decades, lawmakers had sought ways to overturn or sidestep the court's decision. Angered by the ruling in Texas versus Johnson, Congress quickly passed the Flag Protection Act of 1989 It criminalized flag desecration at the federal level. But almost immediately, that law was challenged. In 1990, in United States v. Eichmann, the Supreme Court once again struck down the law. In another 5-4 decision, the court held that the government's interest in preserving the flag as a symbol of national unity did not justify restricting individuals' free expression. With this ruling, the court made clear that flag burning, however offensive, was protected speech. The Constitution, they argued, must defend even the most unpopular forms of expression. In the years following the court's decisions, many politicians sought a more permanent solution. If the court insisted that flag burning was constitutional, then perhaps the Constitution itself needed to be amended. Thus began the push for the Flag Desecration Amendment. Introduced multiple times in Congress, the amendment would have given lawmakers the power to prohibit physical desecration of the U.S. flag. The measure passed the House of Representatives on several occasions and came within a single vote of passing the Senate in 2006. But it never achieved the two-thirds majority required in both chambers, nor did it reach the necessary threshold of ratification by the states. For decades, the amendment failed, and so the law of the land remained. Flag burning as an act of protest is legal. Knowing this history, critics were stunned when Trump signed his order. To them, it represented not just a policy disagreement, but a direct confrontation with settled constitutional law. Legal experts noted that the executive branch cannot unilaterally override Supreme Court precedent. Even if federal prosecutors brought cases against flag burners, courts would almost certainly dismiss the charges under Texas versus Johnson and Eichmann. In effect, the order was daring the courts to relitigate the matter, a strategy that could set up a high-stakes battle before a more conservative Supreme Court. Trump, for his part, welcomed that fight. He insisted that the court had been wrong in 1989 and 1990, and that today's court, with 6 conservative justices, would see things differently. This court respects our flag, our veterans, and our history, he declared. It will not stand by while our symbol is burned and spat on. The executive order ignited a firestorm across the nation. For many Trump supporters, the move was long overdue. Veterans groups, conservative commentators, and nationalist organizations praised the order as a defense of American pride. For them, the flag was not merely cloth, but the embodiment of sacrifice, unity, and freedom. Protecting it, they argued, was common sense. But for civil liberties groups, progressives, and legal scholars, the order was nothing less than an assault on the First Amendment. Organizations such as the American Civil Liberties Union, ACLU, promised immediate legal challenges. Law professors across the country issued statements warning that the order threatened to erode constitutional protections for all unpopular speech. On college campuses, activists staged flag burnings in defiance, daring the federal government to arrest them. The act, once rare, became a rallying cry for defenders of free expression. Opinion writers across the political spectrum weighed in. Some, like conservative commentators, argued that freedom of speech has limits, especially when it comes to national unity. Others countered that the true test of free speech is protecting even those expressions that most Americans despise. A Washington Post columnist called the order a cynical stunt designed to inflame culture wars rather than solve real problems. A New York Post editorial accused Trump of exploiting patriotism to score political points. Meanwhile, right-leaning outlets defended the order as a restoration of respect for national symbols. The debate played out on cable news, CL media, and town halls across the country. Some citizens applauded the president for standing up for the flag. Others feared that if the government could jail someone for burning a piece of cloth, it could jail them for expressing any unpopular opinion. At its heart, the issue was not about the flag, it was about the scope of free speech in America. The First Amendment protects speech, press, religion, assembly, and petition, but time and again the Supreme Court has been asked, what counts as speech? In Texas versus Johnson, the court made clear that expression is not limited to spoken words. Symbolic acts, whether kneeling during the anthem, wearing a protest armband, or burning a flag, can also be speech. If Trump's order survived in court, critics warned, it would represent a dangerous narrowing of that principle. Suddenly, the government would have the power to criminalize symbolic expression simply because it offended the majority. And once that door was opened, who could say where it would stop? Within days of the order, lawsuits were filed. Civil liberties groups sought injunctions, arguing that the order was unconstitutional on its face. Lower courts began to hear cases, and appeals mounted quickly. Most experts predicted that the fight would reach the Supreme Court within a year. The justices, now dominated by conservatives, faced a pivotal choice: uphold 3 decades of precedent protecting flag burning, or overturn those rulings in favor of Trump's vision of patriotic law. Either way, the court's decision would define the boundaries of free speech for a generation. The story of Trump's flag-burning order is more than a tale of one executive order. It is a reflection of America's eternal struggle between liberty and loyalty, between the rights of the individual and the symbols of the nation. The flag is powerful precisely because it represents freedom, yet that freedom is tested when someone chooses to burn it. Is the nation strong enough to protect even that act of protest? Or does patriotism demand limits? For now, America waits as courts, lawmakers, and citizens wrestle with those questions. One thing is certain: the flames lit by this order will not be easily extinguished.